"You can't sit here, kid. This place isn't for you." The words cut through the polished quiet of the restaurant like a cracked plate on fine china. Marcus froze at the edge of the dining area, one sneaker just over the threshold of the marble-tiled floor. The woman speaking, blonde, stiff blazer, thin mouth painted with the kind of lipstick that made smiles look sharp, barely glanced up from her tablet. But when she did, her eyes landed on Marcus's face and lingered. She didn't hide the flicker of disapproval, not confusion, not curiosity, just a quiet, familiar kind of judgment tone that took in his dark skin, the frayed edges of his hoodie, the careful way he stood with both hands visible, like he didn't want to startle anyone. Marcus swallowed. I have a reservation." Her brow lifted. "Is that so?" she said, tone thin as the ice in a forgotten glass of water. "For how many?" "One," he replied, trying to steady his voice. "Of course," she muttered, eyes flicking toward the bar where two white teenagers were laughing over sodas. "You kids and your TikTok experience videos. Let me guess, gonna post about how fancy it is here." Marcus blinked, stunned. He wasn't filming anything. He wasn't loud. He had saved up 3 months of allowance and tutoring money for this moment, and suddenly it felt like a mistake. Her name tag read Emily. "Well, we typically don't seat unaccompanied minors in the front section," she added, her eyes scanning him again, "especially when they don't exactly match our usual clientele." She said it casually, but it landed like a slap. Not our usual clientele. Marcus looked past her shoulder. 3 open tables, white tablecloths, polished silver. He clenched his jaw. "I booked online. It's under Marcus Tillman," he said. "Window seat if possible." Emily tapped the tablet with theatrical slowness. I'm not seeing anything," she said, though she never really looked. "And even if you did, we're booked solid." Her eyes cut sideways. "People usually dress up a bit more when dining here." "I can wait," Marcus said, the words tight behind his teeth. She sighed, dramatically this time, then whispered something to a young server who vanished toward the kitchen. Moments later, a security guard appeared from the hallway, stocky, white, arms folded like a bouncer outside a club. "Is there a problem?" the guard asked, voice polite but with a practiced chill. Marcus didn't answer. His throat felt dry. His mother always told him to stay calm, no matter what, but right now it felt like he was being slowly erased. "You know," Emily said sweetly, "there's a great burger spot just 2 blocks over. Bit more, your style." That did it. Marcus looked down at the floor. The sting behind his eyes wasn't just anger. It was shame. Even though he had done everything right, booked ahead, wore clean clothes, used his best manner, sit still wasn't enough. It never seemed to be. And then quiet, firm a voice beside him. "Let the boy sit." Heads turned. A woman with short silver curls, dark skin, and soft lines around her eyes stood by the drink station, holding a tray of water glasses. Her name tag read Darlene. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She just said it like a fact. Emily's smile thinned. "Darlene, this isn't—" "He's a paying guest, isn't he?" Darlene asked. "Let him sit." Emily pursed her lips, but didn't argue. The security guard didn't move, but his stance softened. Marcus turned to Darlene. She gave him a small nod. "Sit, baby," she said gently, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. "You belong here more than most." Marcus stepped forward and took a table by the window. His legs felt like stone, but he moved carefully, deliberately, like each step mattered. He placed his backpack gently at his feet and sat upright, back straight, hands folded. Darlene set a glass of water in front of him and leaned in with a soft whisper. "Don't let small people shrink you." Marcus didn't speak. He couldn't, but he nodded. Outside, the lights of Lincoln Park flickered across the restaurant window. Inside, Marcus held his silence like armor. He didn't need to shout to make a statement. From the host stand, Emily watched him like a stain on her menu. No menu came. No server arrived. But Marcus didn't move. He just sat, steady, shoulders squared. The boy who had been told again that he didn't belong, and chose to stay anyway. The restaurant buzzed with the soft clink of silverware, murmurs of weekend conversations, and the faint jazz humming from speakers hidden in the molding. Yet, at Marcus's table by the window, there was only silence. He sat still, spine straight, fingers lightly gripping the cold edges of the water glass Darlene had placed in front of him. He hadn't touched it. Not yet. Across the room, Emily hovered behind the host stand, her eyes darting toward him every few minutes like he was a ticking clock she didn't trust. She whispered something to the young server who had returned, a slim boy with slicked hair and a nervous smile. He glanced at Marcus, then looked away quickly, as if eye contact might get him in trouble. The minutes dragged. No one brought a menu. Marcus counted the seconds in his head to keep calm. His mother had taught him that once when you're not allowed to speak, count. When you feel like you're about to cry, breathe and count. When the world tries to make you smaller, count how many pieces of yourself you refuse to give away. He was up to 87 when a nearby customer leaned over to whisper not so quietly to her husband. "Is he lost?" the woman asked, adjusting the pearl buttons on her cardigan. "It's always so awkward when kids come in alone, especially, well, you know." The man didn't reply, but his glance toward Marcus carried the same undertone. "What's he doing here?" Marcus tried to focus on the glass in front of him. He didn't want to hear them. He didn't want to feel the weight of the room pressing against his skin like hot breath. But it was there in the glances, in the silence that followed his presence, in the absence of the things everyone else received without asking. From the far corner of the dining room, Paige, a college intern in a black apron and oversized button-up shirt, peeked toward Marcus with wide eyes. She'd been refilling coffee at the back station when she saw how Emily had treated the boy. Now, she stood frozen, unsure of whether to move. She watched as Marcus reached for the water, took a small sip, and then folded his hands again like he was afraid touching the table too much would justify kicking him out. She slipped her phone from her apron, tapped it on, and slowly angled it to capture the host stand, Emily, the empty server station, and Marcus. Just a few seconds, just in case. Back at the front, Emily leaned closer to the security guard, speaking under her breath. "He's just sitting there. Not eating. Not ordering. Technically, that's loitering, isn't it?" The guard glanced toward Marcus, but something in his eyes had changed. Maybe it was Darlene's quiet authority, or maybe it was the way Marcus hadn't flinched, hadn't lashed out. Either way, he didn't move. Emily's lips tightened. "You know what, I'll handle it," she muttered, grabbing a spare menu with a little more force than necessary. She walked across the floor with the confidence of someone used to correcting what she saw as errors in her domain. She stopped beside Marcus's table and forced a smile. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," she said, voice laced with that sweet southern tone that always managed to sound like an insult dressed up in hospitality. "Now, I'd be happy to take your order, but I must remind you that our lunch menu has a $25 minimum for solo diners." Marcus blinked. "That's not listed online." Well, we don't usually have solo minors, so it's not really common knowledge," she said, her smile sharp now. "But I'm sure you'll find something suitable." He looked at the menu she dropped onto the table. It was the wine menu. She didn't even realize, or maybe she did. From the kitchen doorway, Darlene saw it. Her hands were full, but her jaw clenched. She didn't move yet, not while Emily hovered like a hawk. Emily leaned in slightly, lowered her voice. "Look, this is a nice place. Maybe next time, bring someone with you who knows the atmosphere." Marcus looked up at her then, something shifting in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice, didn't frown. He just met her stare head on and said quietly, "I know exactly where I am." Emily's smile faltered, just a beat, but it was enough. If you felt moved by Marcus's quiet strength in that moment, tap the like button to show your support. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this from. Who knows, someone nearby might be watching and feeling the same way you do right now. Before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the air behind them. "Excuse me, why hasn't my son been served?" Every head in the dining room turned. The security guard stood a little straighter. Paige lowered her phone, stunned. Even Darlene paused mid-step. A tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a plain black coat and jeans, stepped forward from the entrance. His presence didn't scream importance, it whispered it. Calm, precise, like someone who had walked into many rooms where people assumed he didn't belong, until he made it clear he did. Marcus turned, eyes wide. "Dad?" The man smiled. "Hey, buddy." He stepped to the table and gently laid a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Sorry I'm late." Emily took a step back. Didn't realize. No, you didn't, the man said, looking at her with a gaze that didn't waver. But you should have. He extended a hand. Daniel Ellison. Her lips parted. The name hit like a thunderclap. The name above the door. The name etched on the company plaque. The CEO. Mr. Ellison, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was. Mine? Daniel said, his voice cool. That he belonged here? That he was worth your time? Emily's face flushed. Around the room, whispers began to spread like a slow-burning fuse. Darlene approached quietly, setting down a fresh glass of water in front of Marcus with a gentle nod. Paige slowly pocketed her phone, but the look on her face said she wouldn't delete the footage. Not yet. Daniel turned to Marcus. Did you order yet? Marcus shook his head. Daniel sat down across from him, calm as still water. Then let's eat. No one moved. Not yet. Emily hovered, uncertain, stranded between apology and panic. The security guard looked away, embarrassed. And Marcus, for the first time since stepping into the restaurant, leaned back just slightly in his chair. The storm had arrived, but it wasn't his. It was theirs. For a moment, no one moved. Daniel Ellison sat across from Marcus with the poise of a man who'd been here before, just not like this. The tension that had hovered thick over the dining room minutes earlier had now settled into a stunned silence, like the whole restaurant was holding its breath. Emily remained standing, her hand still clutching the edge of the menu like a shield. Her smile had collapsed into something brittle, unfinished. I didn't realize, sir, she said again, but softer now. There must have been a mix-up. Daniel didn't even look at her. His eyes were on Marcus. What were you going to order? Marcus cleared his throat, still unsure if he was dreaming. I never got a menu. Daniel's brows lifted slightly. That's so? He turned back to Emily. Would you mind correcting that? 2. She'll get one right away. She stammered and pivoted sharply toward the host stand, her heels clicking too loudly against the marble. Behind her, whispers rippled through the dining room like waves on tile. Daniel finally exhaled and leaned back in his chair, shoulders settling. You held your ground, he said to Marcus, quietly enough that only his son could hear. Good. Marcus blinked, still processing. You came. Of course I came. He offered a faint smile. You think I was going to let you have your first fine dining experience alone after what you told me this morning? Marcus looked down at the table. I thought maybe you didn't believe it would happen. Daniel's jaw tightened for a second, but he kept his voice steady. I did believe it. I've lived it. At that, Darlene approached, a fresh set of menus in hand-on regular, one for kids, though she offered only the adult version to Marcus without comment. She placed it in front of him, and then nodded at Daniel. Welcome back, Mr. Ellison. Thank you, Darlene. It's good to see a familiar face. Emily returned moments later, flushed, breath slightly uneven, and tried to hand over another menu, but Daniel waved it off. Already taken care of. I just wanted to apologize. I didn't know who he was. I would never. That's the problem, Daniel interrupted, not unkindly but without yielding. You didn't know who he was, so you assumed what he wasn't. Emily froze. I didn't mean. You didn't have to, he said. People rarely do. The silence that followed felt heavier than any raised voice could have been. Emily offered a small nod, almost a bow, and backed away toward the bar, where she immediately began whispering to a junior server, her shoulders rigid, her mouth tight. Across the room, Paige stood near the drink station, her phone tucked away but her eyes sharp, alert. She caught Darlene's glance, and the older woman gave her a small nod of encouragement. Paige hesitated, then stepped forward and approached Daniel's table. Mr. Ellison, she asked, careful, respectful. He looked up. Yes? Me name's Paige. I'm interning here through Roosevelt College's hospitality program. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened, and I recorded some of it, for internal documentation, just in case. Marcus looked up at her, surprised. Daniel gave a slow nod. Good instincts. I wasn't sure if I should intervene, she admitted, but it didn't feel right just watching it happen. You weren't wrong to hesitate, Daniel said. It's hard to know when to step in, but you recorded it. That counts. The truth always counts. Paige nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. Would you like me to send it to someone? Yes, Daniel said, his tone now shifting into executive mode. Send it to my assistant. I'll give you the contact. Darlene, who had lingered nearby, offered Paige a reassuring glance. You did the right thing, honey. After Paige stepped away, Daniel refocused on Marcus. You okay? Marcus nodded, though the weight in his chest hadn't fully lifted. I didn't think it would get this far. I just didn't want to leave. You did more than stay, Daniel said. You let them show who they are without saying a word. Marcus's eyes met his father's. Bard. Is that what you used to do? Daniel smiled, though there was something tired behind it. Sometimes. Other times, I raised hell. But the older I got, the more I realized silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing in the room. They were interrupted by the arrival of a new server, nervous, young, clearly briefed just moments ago. She placed down 2 water carafes and offered them bread from the warming oven with butter on the side. I'll be your server this afternoon, she said carefully. My name's Hannah, and I'll make sure everything's right. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. That's all we expect. As she left, Darlene stayed just a moment longer. That table over there, she said, nodding subtly toward a corner booth, is the one you used to sit at with your business partner when this place first opened. Daniel glanced over. I remember. Different air now, huh? She said softly. Yeah, he replied. But maybe today's a new draft. Darlene gave Marcus a kind smile, then disappeared back into the kitchen. Marcus exhaled slowly, finally feeling his shoulders drop an inch. The room had returned to its routine, but the air was different, subtler now. Servers moved more cautiously. Conversations dipped when they passed Daniel's table. And yet, Marcus didn't feel like an exhibit anymore. He felt seen. As the sun filtered in through the tall windows, dancing against the glassware, Daniel reached across the table and refilled his son's water. What are we eating? He asked. Marcus opened the menu, eyes scanning the options with a newfound sense of peace. I think I want the duck. Daniel chuckled. Bold choice. Marcus looked up, his expression finally loosening into the first real smile of the day. Why not? And for the first time since walking through the door, he didn't feel like the boy in the wrong place. He felt like someone who had always belonged but finally got to prove it. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the time the entrees arrived, Marcus's duck breast, perfectly seared, and Daniel's steak, rare. Almost everyone in the restaurant knew who was seated at table 6. The murmur was subtle at first, soft as silverware on linen, but it spread in glances, in whispered phrases like, "That's the CEO," or "He's the owner's kid," spoken not with interest, but disbelief. Emily had vanished from the floor entirely. The security guard, who earlier stood like a sentry, now lingered near the kitchen, suddenly interested in a maintenance checklist. Servers moved brisker now, eyes averted but alert. Even the couple in pearls who'd whispered about Marcus earlier now sat stiffly, their smiles too wide and hands too still. Paige stood near the drink station, phone pressed to her chest. She'd sent the video to the executive assistant's email as instructed, but a quiet tension gnawed at her. Would this cost her internship? Would someone accuse her of violating company policy? From behind the partition near the hallway, Darlene caught her eye and gave a knowing look. Paige returned it with a small nod, then grabbed a water pitcher and began refilling glasses. Busy hands, quiet ears. Back at the table, Marcus chewed slowly. He hadn't spoken much since the food arrived, but Daniel didn't push. He simply cut his steak, glanced at the wine list without ordering, and occasionally looked at his son like he was studying something valuable. Then, softly, "How's it taste?" Marcus shrugged. "Good. You picked it like you knew exactly what you wanted." Marcus took a sip of water before answering. "I looked it up last night. Reviews said it's their best dish." Daniel smiled faintly. "You planning this for a while?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "After the scholarship letter, I wanted to treat myself." "You did." Daniel set his fork down. "And then they treated you like you were a mistake." Marcus said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Across the room, a tall, square-jawed man in a slate blue blazer emerged from the side office. His walk was clipped and heavy. He headed straight for the table. Daniel didn't turn to look. "That's Julian." Your assistant?" Marcus asked. Daniel shook his head. "Vice President of Operations. He runs internal compliance." Julian stopped beside the table, nodding once toward Daniel, then eyeing Marcus with something softer than scrutiny. "Good afternoon, sir. We've received the footage." "Already?" Daniel asked, sipping his water. "Miss Page sent it. We confirmed its contents with security footage. The timeline aligns." Daniel turned to Marcus. "You're now part of company history." Julian remained standing, professional, composed. "Would you like us to begin internal review today?" Daniel tapped his fingers against the rim of his plate, thinking. "Yes, but quietly. No press, no memo shet, and no sweeping it under the rug either." Julian nodded. "Discretion with consequence. Understood." "What about Emily?" Marcus asked suddenly. Both men turned to him. Julian responded first. "She's currently off the floor. We'll be conducting a formal evaluation, but we don't act on emotion." Daniel added, "But we do act on pattern, and she's not new here." Marcus looked down at his plate. "She didn't even blink when she saw me, like I didn't count." Daniel's voice dropped. "That's exactly what she'll have to account for." From the bar, Darlene watched with careful eyes. She wasn't close enough to hear, but she could tell by the shift in posture, the ripple of unease among staff, that things were moving. She set her tray down gently and stepped toward the table. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I was wondering if Mr. Marcus might want to try the chocolate souffle on the house. We don't always offer it midday, but it seems fitting." Marcus blinked. "I've never had souffle." Daniel smiled. "Then this is a good day for firsts." Darlene gave a warm nod. "I'll have them start one. Takes 14 minutes, but it's worth the wait." Julian glanced at his watch. "That's about the time I need to gather the shift staff for initial debrief." Daniel waved him on. "Take Paige and Darlene with you, not to question them, to listen." As Julian walked off, Darlene lingered a beat. "You've raised him right," she said, not as flattery but fact. Daniel looked at Marcus. "He's raising himself just fine." Darlene's eyes misted just slightly, but she turned away before it showed. Paige followed Julian into the back hallway, heart thudding. She didn't know what would happen next, but as she passed Daniel's table, he gave her a single nod. Not thank you, not well done, just seen. She carried that with her. Back in the dining room, a man at the far booth stood and approached Daniel's table. Gray hair, pressed khakis, the look of old money or old authority. "Mr. Ellison," he said, "I've dined here for years. I just want to say, I didn't know that young man was your son, but I hope he knows not everyone here thinks the way that woman did." Daniel looked up slowly. "Thank you, but he shouldn't have to be my son to matter." The man hesitated, nodded once, then returned to his table without another word. Marcus watched him go. "Did you mean that?" "I did," Daniel said. "But the world doesn't always live up to what we mean. That's why we show up. That's why we sit at the table." Marcus looked out the window. The street outside bustled like nothing had happened inside these walls. But he knew better. He'd watched how silence could shout. He'd felt the shift in a room when someone stopped pretending. He turned back to his plate and took another bite of duck. It was still warm. He was still here. The room still watched, but not like before. Now, they watched because they remembered how they had looked at him and how wrong they'd been. The dining room had quieted again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It wasn't the dismissive hush of superiority or the awkward silence of avoidance. This was something heavier, reflective, cautious, like the air after a thunderclap. People still talked, but with measured tones. Servers moved, but no longer in autopilot. It was as if something fundamental had been exposed, and now everyone was figuring out what to do with the truth they had witnessed. In the back hallway, behind the double doors that separated staff from guests, Julian stood at the head of a small conference table in the staff lounge. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above. Around the table sat Emily, arms crossed, face pale alongside the young waiter who had ignored Marcus's presence, the hostess on the evening shift, and Paige, who clutched her notepad like a shield. Darlene stood at the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame, arms folded, her apron still tied neatly around her waist. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. Julian's tone was steady, not unkind, but stripped of any indulgence. "This isn't a disciplinary meeting. Not yet. It's a documentation meeting. We're collecting first-hand accounts and comparing them with security footage, guest reports, and one particularly clear video recording from Miss Page. Emily's eyes flicked toward Page with something between anger and disbelief. Page looked down. Julian continued, I want each of you to describe what you saw, what you thought was happening, and why you responded or didn't. He pointed to the young waiter. Start with you. The waiter shifted uncomfortably. I thought he was just waiting for someone. He looked young. I didn't think. You didn't think, Julian repeated. You made a decision in that moment, and your decision was to ignore him. Why? Eli hesitated. Honestly, I guess I assumed he wasn't supposed to be there. Julian didn't move. Because he was young? Because he was alone? Or because he was black? The room held its breath. Eli blinked, looked down, then whispered, all of it, I guess. Julian nodded once. Not in approval, but acknowledgement. Next, Emily stiffened. I followed protocol. He came in without a guardian, and our policy. Julian raised a hand. Let me stop you there. The policy you're referring to hasn't existed in 4 years. It was removed in the 2020 revision of the guest intake manual. Every staff member received that update. Emily opened her mouth, closed it, then said flatly, Fine, I was concerned about safety. Whose safety? She flinched, just slightly. Julian pressed on. Did he raise his voice? Threaten anyone? Cause a scene? No, but he was. What? Julian asked quietly. Present? Emily's yaw clenched. I didn't recognize him. Julian leaned forward. And because you didn't recognize him, you treated him like a risk. Page spoke up, voice small. He didn't even ask for anything unreasonable. He just wanted to sit. Julian turned to her. Why did you start recording? Paige hesitated. Because I felt like if I didn't, no one would believe how bad it actually was. Emily scoffed. Oh, please. He was fine. Sitting by the window, like a prince, getting more attention than anyone. Darlene finally stepped in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. No, Emily. He was sitting like a child trying not to be chased away. The room fell quiet. Julian didn't interrupt. He let the words settle like dust in the light. Darlene walked in fully now, standing beside the table. I've worked here since the soft opening. I've seen bad guests, rude ones, drunk ones. That boy wasn't any of those things. He was polite, nervous, and from the moment he walked in, you decided he was a problem. Emily turned to her. You always take the guest's side. No, Darlene said evenly. I take the side of people who come here expecting decency and get told, in every possible way, that they don't belong. Julian nodded slowly. Thank you, Darlene. Oh. He tapped on his tablet, then turned it toward the table. The screen showed security footage from earlier that day, grainy but clear. It captured Marcus standing at the host stand. Emily's posture as she looked him over. The moment she signaled to the security guard. The way no one brought him water. Until Darlene did. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No obvious slurs. But that was what made it worse. It was routine. Silent. Systemic. Pai looked away. Julian paused the video. This isn't about punishing individuals. This is about confronting the culture that made today possible. He turned back to Emily. But in your case, there will be consequences. Emily's face went rigid. I've been with this company for 10 years. One mistake. One exposure, Julian corrected. It wasn't a mistake. It was a habit. Today, it happened in front of the wrong boy at the right moment. Emily stared at the table. For the first time, she had no answer. Julian gathered his tablet and stood. You're on administrative leave pending full review. Your final status will depend on the internal evaluation. To Eli, he said, you'll undergo bias training. Recertification is required to remain on floor staff. He turned to Paige. You'll be assigned directly under corporate guest experience for the rest of your internship, if you want it. Paige blinked. Yes. I mean thank you. Darlene stepped aside, letting Julian pass. But as she did, she said quietly to the room, the boy didn't ask for anything more than what everyone else already had. Think about that. He didn't want special. He wanted fair. Back in the dining room, Marcus sat with Daniel, finishing the last bite of his duck as the soufflé arrived golden, rising perfectly from its ramekin, the smell rich and warm. Daniel cut into it slowly, then handed Marcus the first bite. Marcus took it, savoring the texture, then smiled. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten." Daniel laughed. "I told you it was worth staying for." And just like that, the mask that had hovered over the room all day, pretense, politeness, protection, fell away. What remained was still messy, still human, but finally honest. And honesty, like soufflé, has a way of collapsing if rushed. So they didn't rush. They let it sit. And they stayed. The next morning arrived quietly, blanketing the city in soft gray light. Rain tapped against tall windows of the hotel's upper-floor boardroom, where the scent of polished wood mingled with faint notes of freshly brewed coffee. Inside, the senior executive team of Lancaster Properties sat in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on the man at the head of the table, Daniel Lancaster. Dressed sharply in a slate-blue suit, Daniel tapped his fingers slowly on a folder marked Internal Incident Flagship Location. Next to it sat a printed report with the name Marcus Hill, typed neatly across the top. "Before we begin," Daniel said calmly, "I want to make one thing clear. What we discussed today isn't about a boy being denied a seat. It's about a fracture, a hairline crack in the foundation of everything we claim to stand for." The room shifted uncomfortably. Older executives exchanged looks. A few reached for their coffee as if to mask unease. A woman in her 60s, Ellen Harrington, head of operations, spoke up. "We've all seen the footage. It looks bad. But Emily was acting in what she believed to be the hotel's best interest. She's been loyal." Daniel looked at her, his voice measured. "Loyalty means nothing if it abandons dignity. Emily saw a child and judged his presence a threat not because of what he did, but because of what he looked like." He reached into his folder and pulled out a still frame from the security camera. It showed Marcus standing by the host stand, hands folded nervously in front of him, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked so small, alone, waiting. "Tell me," Daniel said, placing the image down in front of Ellen, "does this look like a security concern to you?" She didn't answer. A man across the table, Jacob Stills, head of marketing, cleared his throat. "What are we planning to do? A press release? A formal apology? Do we mention your personal involvement?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "We're not doing damage control. We're doing repair, from the inside out." The room went still again. He stood, walked over to the tall windows, and let the silence stretch. Below, the city pulsed with early traffic, people in suits, umbrellas, school buses winding through downtown streets. "I designed that hotel to be more than a 5-star experience," he said, still looking out. "It was meant to be a statement that no matter who you are, if you walk through those doors, you matter." He turned back. "But yesterday my son walked in, and no one saw him." Gasps rippled through the room. A younger executive leaned forward, stunned. "Marcus is your son?" Daniel nodded once, solemnly. "Biologically, no. But by choice? Yes. By heart? Absolutely." He let the weight of that sink in. "Do you know what it took for him to walk in there alone? To wear that shirt and tie and believe he'd be welcomed?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "And do you know what he came away with instead?" No one dared speak. He sat back down and opened the final folder. "Effective today, the following actions will be taken. First, a mandatory company-wide inclusion and bias audit led by an independent third party. Second, Emily Johnson's employment is terminated. Third, all regional managers will undergo revised training, including historical bias awareness." He looked up, his gaze steely. "And finally, we are launching a mentorship and youth engagement program under the Lancaster Foundation, named after Marcus." The room was frozen. "You're naming it after him?" Jacob asked slowly. "I am," Daniel replied, "because it shouldn't take the CEO's son getting ignored for us to care. But since it happened, we're going to use it." There was a long pause before Ellen spoke again, softer this time. "He's a good kid, quiet, observant. I saw him yesterday, didn't realize who he was, but he reminded me of my grandson." Daniel's eyes softened just slightly. "Then let's build a world where your grandson won't have to carry a resume in his pocket just to prove he belongs." As the meeting adjourned, the executives rose in near silence, absorbing the shift in tone, in priorities, in leadership. Something old had cracked, but something new, more honest. More human was starting to form. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat on the edge of a bench in Central Park, legs swinging as he stared out at the water. Darlene approached, carrying 2 hot dogs wrapped in foil and a small bag of kettle chips. "You like mustard?" she asked, sitting beside him. He nodded with a little grin. "Only if it's not the spicy kind." She handed him the hot dog and chuckled. "You've got standards, huh?" They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the kind that only forms after something difficult has been survived together. "You okay?" she asked gently. Marcus shrugged. "I guess. People were staring at me today. At school. Some of them saw the video. Some teachers gave me weird looks, like I'd become someone else overnight." Darlene peeled back the foil of her hot dog. "You haven't become someone else. You've just become seen. That makes people nervous." He looked down. "I didn't want to cause trouble." "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes, Marcus, trouble's the only way the truth gets heard." He sat with that for a while, then said, "Mr. Lancaster, he told me I belonged there, but I don't think I believed it until now." Darlene nodded. "That's the thing about truth. Baby, it doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it just sits next to you on a park bench and hands you a hot dog." He smiled, leaning into her shoulder slightly. Nearby, a couple passed by with a golden retriever, and a saxophonist played under the archway just ahead. Life, uninterrupted. Back at the hotel, workers were replacing the framed mission statement at the entrance. The old one read, "Excellence in Service." The new one, printed in elegant gold type, read, "Everyone deserves a seat at the table." And beneath it, the Marcus Hill Initiative. Marcus was still wiping mustard from his fingers when Darlene's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then up at Marcus with a puzzled expression. "It's from Mr. Lancaster," she said. "He wants to see both of us at the hotel tomorrow. Noon. It says, for something important." Marcus tilted his head, unsure. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Darlene replied, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "I think, maybe it's the opposite." The next day, the Lancaster Grand Hotel looked different. Or maybe it was Marcus who had changed. As he stepped through the tall glass doors once more, dressed in the same navy blazer, but this time with polished shoes and a fresh confidence, the air didn't feel as heavy. Staff greeted them at the door, smiles, polite nods, not a hint of hesitation. The elevator ride was silent but warm. Darlene stood beside Marcus, glancing at her reflection in the polished brass walls. Her eyes caught his, and they exchanged a silent reassurance. Whatever this was, they were walking into it together. When the elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, they stepped out into a private reception room with sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline. At the far end stood Daniel Lancaster, dressed casually in a soft gray sweater and slacks, his hands resting on the back of a leather chair. Beside him stood a woman with a kind but sharp face, holding a tablet and dressed in all black. She smiled warmly at them. "Marcus, Darlene," Daniel greeted, his tone softer than usual. "I'm glad you came." Marcus nodded, his voice a whisper. "Hi, sir." "No, sir, today. Just Daniel." He motioned toward the chairs arranged in a loose circle. "Have a seat. This won't take long, but I hope it means something." Darlene watched him carefully, curious but cautious. Daniel turned toward the woman beside him. "This is Alicia Moore. She's the director of youth outreach for the new initiative." Alicia smiled at Marcus. "I've heard a lot about you, Marcus. You're braver than most grown men I know." Marcus blushed slightly and looked down. Daniel stepped forward. "I wanted you to be the first to know. We're launching the Marcus Hill Initiative next month. It's a mentorship and support program for young people of color who want to explore careers in hospitality, business, and leadership. It will be housed right here, at this hotel." Marcus's eyes widened, and Darlene blinked. "Wait, what?" Daniel smiled. "The program includes scholarships, internships, and personal mentorship. We're starting with 12 students. You'll be the first, and I want you to help shape it." Marcus stared at him, speechless. "I don't need you to be a perfect speaker or a straight-A student," Daniel added. "I just need you to be you, the kid who stood up straight when someone looked down on him, the kid who walked into this hotel with hope." Darlene reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it. "You see, baby? That quiet strength of yours, it mattered." "But I'm just a kid," Marcus whispered. I don't know how to run a program. You don't need to, Alicia said kindly. You just need to tell your story. Be present. Let others know they're not alone. That's the beginning of leadership. There was a long pause. Marcus looked between them all, then nodded. I'll try, he said softly. Daniel knelt down so they were eye level. That's all I ever needed to hear. Later that evening, back at their apartment, Darlene sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window as twilight bled into the city. Marcus was in his room, humming as he lined up school supplies neatly on his desk. She hadn't seen him this light in weeks, maybe ever. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her pastor. Caught the news. Is that Marcus? Proud doesn't even cover it. Darlene smiled and typed back a simple heart. Then the landline rang. She picked it up, curious. Hello? A deep voice answered. Miss Thompson? This is Councilman Bradley's office. We heard about the Marcus Hill initiative. The councilman would like to meet with you and your son. We think this could be something the city supports on a broader scale. Darlene covered her mouth, tears welling. Yes, of course. That night, as she stood by Marcus's door, watching him fold a collared shirt carefully into his drawer like it was gold, she spoke. Marcus? Yeah? Do you know what legacy means? He turned around. Like, what people remember about you after you're gone. She nodded. You're already building one, baby. One where no one will ever feel invisible again. Marcus looked at her, then at the window, where the city lights blinked like distant stars. Maybe someday, I'll own a hotel like that, but it'll have a big sign in the front. What would it say? He thought for a second. No one eats alone here. Darlene smiled through her tears. I'd stay there in a heartbeat. And down the hallway, the soft light of their little home burned through the night, while far across the city, blueprints were being drawn, budgets allocated, and walls prepared to carry the name of a boy who had once just wanted a table. The next morning, Marcus and Darlene woke to the sound of voices outside their apartment window, not shouting, cheering. Darlene parted the curtain to see a small group of neighbors gathered near the sidewalk, holding signs that read, "We stand with Marcus, justice and hospitality, and every child matters." She stepped back, stunned. Marcus, you need to see this. Marcus peeked out, eyes wide. Is that Mrs. Kaplan from across the hall? Looks like it, Darlene whispered, blinking back disbelief. And Mr. Singh from the corner deli. They're all here. News had spread overnight. The local paper ran a piece titled From Rejection to Revolution, The Boy Who Changed a Hotel, and it had caught fire online. Dozens of community leaders, educators, and even celebrities had shared the story. The hotel's social media page was flooded with thousands of comments, many of them supportive, others not so kind. At the Lancaster Grand, Daniel Lancaster sat in his office scrolling through the digital storm. A sharp knock broke his focus. It was Amanda Rowe, the hotel's public relations head. Her normally composed face was tight with worry. Daniel, we have a problem, she said, stepping in without waiting for permission. Corporate saw the initiative. The board wants answers. Some say this is political, that it's racial activism. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. And what do you think it is, Amanda? I think it's overdue, she replied. But the pressure is real. I've received over a dozen complaints from longtime patrons. One said, and I quote, "If I wanted to see affirmative action, I'd watch the news, not check into a hotel." Daniel's jaw clenched. Then maybe they should find another hotel. She nodded, but her voice dropped. There's more. We got an email from Teresa Whitmore. Daniel's brow furrowed. The woman from the lounge? She's demanding a formal apology from Marcus. Claims she was intimidated and humiliated. Daniel stood up sharply. She mocked a child in front of a full dining room. She's on the board of the Women's Business Foundation. She's threatening to withdraw funding from our scholarship programs. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Let them, Daniel said finally, his voice steady. If supporting a young boy who showed more character in 10 minutes than some adults show in a lifetime costs us donors, then so be it. Amanda nodded once and left, quietly closing the door behind her. Back in their apartment, Darlene paced the kitchen, the local news playing low in the background. The Marcus Hill initiative has ignited a national conversation around bias in luxury service spaces. While support is strong, some critics call the move performative and divisive. Darlene turned off the television with a sigh. Marcus sat at the table, tracing his finger along the rim of a glass. "Did I mess something up, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Darlene crouched beside him. "No, baby. You stirred something up. That's not the same." He nodded, but his shoulders sagged. "I didn't want to make people mad." Sometimes," she said gently. "When you tell the truth, people who live comfortably in a lie will get mad, but that doesn't make your truth wrong." That evening, a black SUV pulled up outside their building. Daniel Lancaster stepped out, holding 2 boxes. Marcus opened the door, surprised. "Mr. Lancaster?" Daniel grinned. "Hope I'm not interrupting. I brought something." He set the boxes down. Inside were 10 mock-ups of hotel nameplates, each with the words, "Marcus Hill Initiative" engraved in brushed gold. "We're launching early," Daniel said. "You're going to be the face of the first round of mentorship events. We're doing it next week." Marcus blinked. "Why now?" Daniel's smile faded, replaced by calm resolve. "Because when you're making history, you don't ask permission. You just do it." Later that night, as Marcus brushed his teeth, Darlene scrolled through her phone. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Saw your son on the news. I teach at Lincoln High. We'd love for him to speak to our seniors about courage. Name your day." She smiled softly, her fingers trembling as she replied, "He'd be honored." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his office again, staring out the window. In his hands was an old photo of his younger self, no older than Marcus, sitting in front of a church with his grandmother. She had raised him on stories of dignity, humility, and legacy. He whispered to the photo, "I think you'd like this kid." The next morning, while the city buzzed with opinions, schedules, and debates, a boy named Marcus stood at his window, watching the sun break through the clouds. For the first time in his life, he felt not just seen, but needed. And across the skyline, just visible in the distance, the glass panels of the Lancaster Grand Hotel shimmered like they were holding their breath waiting for something bigger than business. Something that started simply, with a boy being told, "You don't belong," and answering, in silence, "Yes, I do." 1 week later, the lobby of the Lancaster Grand looked nothing like it had the day Marcus had been turned away. Where once there was quiet indifference, now stood a crowd of guests, reporters, students, and community leaders. Cameras flashed. A banner hung from the mezzanine. The Marcus Hill Initiative, opening ceremony. Marcus stood near the front desk, wearing a small navy blazer and polished shoes. He shifted nervously, clutching a folded speech in his hand, while his mother stood beside him in a soft cream dress, her hand resting on his shoulder. She leaned close and whispered, "You okay, baby?" He nodded, but his voice cracked. "I think I'm more scared now than I was that day." "That's how you know it matters," she whispered back. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and Daniel Lancaster approached the podium. His suit was immaculate, but his voice carried no pretense. "Good morning," he began. "This hotel has stood in the heart of this city for over 30 years, and yet, last week, it was a 10-year-old boy who taught us all what real hospitality should look like." A quiet hush fell over the room. "I won't pretend we got it right the first time, but we are trying to get it right now. Today, we're opening our doors wider than ever before, and we are naming our newest community mentorship space after someone who reminded us that character doesn't wait for age, or titles, or permission." He turned toward Marcus. "Marcus Hill, will you join me?" Applause erupted. Marcus froze for a second, then took a shaky breath and stepped forward. Daniel knelt slightly so the boy could reach the microphone. For a moment, the room stilled. Marcus unfolded his speech but didn't read it. Instead, he looked out at the sea of unfamiliar faces and spoke from his chest. "My mom always tells me to speak up, even when my voice shakes," he began, hands clenched at his sides. "So that's what I'm doing." Laughter broke the tension gently. "I didn't know one day at a hotel would change everything. I just knew something didn't feel right. Not because I was hungry, but because someone looked at me like I didn't matter. And that's a feeling you don't forget." He looked toward Teresa Whitmore, who sat stiffly near the back, her lips pressed into a line. "I didn't want to make trouble. I just wanted to sit with my mom. But I guess sometimes speaking up feels like trouble to people who aren't used to hearing it." Silence again. Then someone clapped, then another, until the whole room rose in a standing ovation. Marcus turned, blinking quickly, and ran into his mother's arms. After the ceremony, guests were invited to tour the newly renovated lounge now named the Marcus Hill Room. It was filled with bookshelves, learning tables, and framed portraits of young community mentors. On the far wall, a quote was engraved into brushed metal. "Justice isn't about punishment, it's about making things right." Marcus Hill, age 10. Amanda Rowe pulled Daniel aside. "You should know, the board issued a statement this morning. They're standing with us. Whitmore's foundation backed off, and we've had a flood of new inquiries for partnerships." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. That's good." Outside, as the crowd thinned, a white-haired man in a baseball cap approached Darlene and Marcus. His hands were weathered, and he carried a cane. "You, the boy from the story?" he asked. Marcus nodded. The old man smiled gently. "My grandson's about your age. He's been struggling to speak up in school, but after reading about you, he asked his teacher if he could start a kindness club. Said, if Marcus can change a hotel, maybe I can change my classroom." Marcus's eyes widened. Darlene clutched her son's hand tighter, fighting back emotion. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "No, ma'am," the man replied. "Thank you both." As the sun dipped low and guests filed out, Daniel stood alone in the Marcus Hill room, watching the lights dim. Amanda stepped beside him. Hard to believe it started with a tray of food and a closed mind. Daniel nodded. And ended with a door being opened for all the right reasons. Later that night, back at their apartment, Marcus was curled up on the couch, still wearing his blazer. Darlene tucked a blanket around him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "You proud of yourself?" she asked. He smiled sleepily. "A little, but mostly proud I didn't cry at the microphone." She laughed softly. "That's the part that made me cry." There was a quiet beat. "Mom?" "Yes, baby. Does this mean I belong now?" She leaned in, kissed his forehead, and said, "You always did. The world just caught up." And as the city slept, somewhere in the heart of its oldest hotel, a room with a young boy's name on it stayed lit through the night, welcoming the next person who just needed to be seen.